So, welcome everybody to the December interview for the Cozy Mystery Book Club. And I'm Zara Keane. I'm sitting here with our December author, Kate P. Adams. So, Kate, thank you so much for joining us this month, and I'm really looking forward to having a chat with you.
That's great to be here.
Excellent. So, we'll get straight to it. Um, you spent a huge chunk of your working life working in stately homes, I understand, which ties in excellently with your Charlton House series.
Yeah,
And can you tell our readers a little bit about your work experience and how that impacted your idea for your first Cozy Mystery series?
yeah, absolutely. Well, my career actually started off in theatre, but then I moved from there to the Natural History Museum in central London, and from there to Hampton Court Palace, just outside of London. And Hampton Court Palace was one of the many homes of Henry VIII, and that's what it's most famous for. And from there, I went on to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. But Hampton Court Palace was, I suppose, one of the biggest influences on the series because I get to see how they're run. I know what happens behind the scenes and what it takes to open a stately home to the public. Also, having worked somewhere like that for so long, you become familiar with all the kind of stories that exist, whether it's historical information, uh, one or two people who live there now, um, ghost stories, you name it. There's all sorts of possibilities. Yeah, I had plenty of material to work with. The other thing that I always say about the Charlton House Mysteries is that the whole series really is a kind of love letter to my time at Hampton Court Palace because it was such a happy time in my career. It was a fabulous place to work with incredible people, and I was so fortunate that I wanted to bring some of that to the page. Um, so add that in to things like I was raised by parents who would take me to National Trust properties all the time and English heritage. The stately home closest to where I grew up is Chatsworth House, which
Okay.
a lot of
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of British readers in particular will be familiar with Chatsworth. And when I describe Charlton House, which is my fictional stately home, people familiar with them will know that some of it is based on Chatsworth, some of the buildings are based on Hampton Court. And Chatsworth House, I'm very fond of. And once I had the opportunity to tell the Duke of Devonshire, which was very good. So yeah, my background has just given me a wealth of material and a real passion for the subject, which makes Charlton House series so much fun to write.
So, your book of the month is part of the Charlton House series, and it's called A Stately Murder.
Mhm.
Can you tell us where it fits in the series, and if readers can need to read the series in order to understand the story in this
Yeah,
month's
sure.
book?
They definitely don't need to have read any of the rest of the books. The reason being that A Stately Murder is kind of a sneaky little prequel. So the official first book of the series is Death by Dark Roast, and that's where a lot of people start. And in that book, I make a little bit of a reference to a previous murder that my lead character has been involved with. So a stately murder comes before that. So it's actually the perfect place to start. And that introduces a couple of the key characters. And it's the first time that Sophie, the protagonist, has investigated a murder. So if anybody out there, well, there'll be quite a few out there who have yet to read my books, don't worry, this is a good place to start.
Okay. So you, in addition to the Charlton House series, you have a spin-off series called the Joyce and Ginger series, or the Joyce and Ginger Mysteries, if I have that correct.
Mhm.
How did you decide on, because this is something that I also, as an author, think about, how do you pick a character from an existing series to make a spin-off with? Like what appeals to you about that character, and how did you go about deciding what type of a series would work for this person?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's various characters in the Charlton House Mysteries that I felt would be kind of ripe material for heading off into a spin-off because there's so many stories and adventures that I could be putting in Charlton House and I just don't have the space for it all. So a spin-off was a chance to do that and to explore some characters further. And it was a couple of things really that made me think about Joyce. One is that Joyce is so much fun to write. She speaks her mind. she's got quite an acerbic sense of humor, but she also, loves her friends deeply. It's just every scene that I wrote with her in was fun to write and just seemed so easy to do. She was a pleasure to kind of hang out with. And I would often in my daily life, in my real life, find myself thinking, oh, what would Joyce do now? What would Joyce be thinking about this? So she was a character that I enjoyed spending time with. Then I knew from feedback that a lot of my readers really enjoyed Joyce, and they would talk about laughing out loud with some of her scenes and enjoying how she was developing as a character throughout the book. So I knew there was an appetite there for people to find out more about Joyce. And then I was writing, it's called A Tragic Act, which I think is book 5, I think, in the series. And in A Tragic Act, a character is introduced called Ginger. And she is so different to Joyce. But during the course of the book, they became very good friends. And I got to the end of the book and thought, I've not had enough of these two. They're really kind of like the odd couple in many respects, and play off each other. And again, it was great fun to write any scenes with them in. And I thought, I'm not done with them. They need more adventures, and they need some adventures on their own. And they had referenced, well, I say they had referenced, I mean, the characters do seem to take over sometimes. I don't have a lot of say in what all my characters do, but they had referenced in a conversation, unbeknownst to me at the time, they had talked about going away for a weekend on holiday because they just got on so well. And I thought, okay, that's the way to go. There's another book here where they can go away and they stumble across a body. So it was a mixture of those things, really. It was the ideal character. It was somebody the readers liked. It was somebody I enjoyed writing and spending time with. And then I thought, well, I would like to take some books outside of Charlton House. I've already done that with one of my Charlton House books, but I wanted to do it a lot more with other characters. So I thought, okay, Joyce and Ginger, every book can be a vacation, and they head off on this couple. So that was how I came to it. It was just a number of key elements that all added up and made Joyce and Ginger the perfect couple. The couple as friends. But also with Joyce, because I think people assume quite a lot about Joyce because she is, like I say, she's this very loud, outspoken character. But there's a backstory to Joyce. She's an interesting woman with a lot of past experiences that inform who she is now. And I felt like I wanted to share that with the world as well. And so yeah, there's 2 at the moment.
Okay.
And the third one, I'm halfway through, took a bit of a break, but I will be getting that one up and running hopefully in the new year. So there should be a third out at some point in the second half of next year. Yeah,
Very
so that's my
nice. So, as well as your full-length books, I know you write a lot of short stories as well, and I'm actually looking at your 2 lovely typewriters in the background here. Because
yeah.
I know that when you initially talked about writing those, you were talking about writing them on a typewriter.
Mm.
Did you end up doing that? Is that how you write the short stories?
Yeah.
And how do the short stories sort of fit into your various series?
Yeah, well, the typewriters, absolutely. That's how I start off the short stories. The first draft is always written on a vintage typewriter. I just think they're beautiful objects.
Yeah.
It's great fun to use them, and it's really nice to get away from laptops and phones and all the technology and just switch off from all of that. And I mean, I think in some respects I was born in the wrong era. I also love using fountain pens. I like real fountain pens. All my notes when I'm getting ready to do a book, they're all done in fountain pen. I write letters to people in fountain pen. And yeah, typewriters was kind of a logical progression. And I wanted to have a go with typewriters because I was curious to see if it would change how I wrote and how I thought. And I do find that, yeah, I write a little bit differently when I'm using a typewriter. There's a little bit more kind of stream of consciousness. You really have to get a pattern going with the fingers and the typing. And I was once told that somebody learned to type by doing it in time to music. And so I sort of
Oh,
do that. And I don't want to stop and lose my
okay.
flow. So if it's rubbish that's coming out, I do call the first draft of all my work the vomit draft.
Mhm.
So I sort of vomit these ideas. I just keep going with the typewriter and I don't get distracted. So I'm finding that the end product is a little bit different. So yes, I always start off and do the first draft on a typewriter, and then I move on to the laptop and I start tidying stuff up. The short stories for me kind of play a key role really in the series. I have one collection which is called Tales from Charlton House, which is a novella, which actually introduces us to the idea of Joyce and Ginger going off and solving a murder, and then a series of short stories. A number of my books, they're now increasingly having a free short story at the end of the main full-length book as well. And I just think it's a great way to explore things that you haven't really got time for in a full-length book, or it's not appropriate. So particularly the minor characters, I might focus a short story on them and you find out more about them. You might find out more about the history of Charlton House. It gives me a chance to delve into interesting subjects and histories and people, and for me to practice my short story writing skills, because just as a genre, it's completely different to writing a full-length book. And I want to keep pushing myself and testing my skills as a writer and to continue to develop. And short stories is an interesting way of doing that. So yeah, I mean, the short stories all stand alone. You don't have to read them in order to really grasp what's happening in the main series. But I would recommend that people do, because you just get a much broader picture of life within Charlton House and the people that live there and are involved. So yeah, that's why I do it. Personal passion and spending time with characters and places that I love in the books. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And I can totally identify with the change it simply by it. I often write first drafts partially by hand these days because I find it frees up my mind and it switches off my inner editor. So I can imagine that for you with the typewriter, it frees you up a little bit from the usual expectations when you're sitting down to your dedicated writing program that, uh,
Mm.
usually
Yeah.
crop up. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be too easy to self-edit, to go back and delete stuff, to sit there and stare at it. With the
Mhm.
typewriter, you just got to keep going. And if it's no good, you'll take it out later. But if you keep going with that idea, you might find that it turns into something worthwhile that you wouldn't have explored if you just deleted that sentence on a laptop. I think also there is something about being connected much more closely and more physically to the words on the page. So I sort of think about the amount of electronics between my fingertips and the screen on a laptop. If you're holding a fountain pen or bashing the keys on a typewriter and the ink is going straight on the paper, to me, there's something symbolic about the idea traveling from you through the equipment onto the piece of paper that I really quite like. And I also find that it helps me think. So with using pen and paper when I'm first making notes, I will completely, pour my thoughts down on paper. I'll even write things like, that's no good, don't include it. Or she already said that in the last book. I
Mhm.
kind of have to get out of my head down, even if it's not the story and it's my thought process. And if I can't do that, if I can't sit there with a piece of paper, I don't think properly in some respects.
Yeah.
I'll come up with ideas when I'm out on a walk, and I'll do that quite a lot. But in terms of really developing something, I'm not going to sit there looking at a view and really develop the plot and what goes on. I have to pull out a pen and paper and let the thoughts travel through my hand, down the pen and onto the paper. And that seems to be the only way I can do it. So, yeah, a good bit of analog, I think, is helpful for my brain.
So jumping from away from the screen to on screen, I've
Mm.
seen a number of cozy mystery adaptations in the last few years, or rather, even if they're not adapted from existing book series, an awful lot of cozy mystery adjacent TV series seem to be quite popular. For example, Acorn in the US has a lot of them. We have a channel here that shows a lot of them. Can
Yeah.
you think of okay, this might be the easy part, a setting where you could have your Charlton House
Yeah.
TV adaptation set? Uh,
Mm.
and have you ever visualized like what sort of an actor could play Sophie or any of the other characters in the series? Or is that not something that you do?
Um, Strictly speaking, it's not something I do because I don't even sort of think about, I really want to get them filmed. I'd love to see
Mhm.
them me, because I like writing for books, so it's never been an aspiration. I'm not sort of quietly hoping that I'll get a phone call off a TV producer. It's not something I'm aiming for. Having said all that, though, of course, it would be Chatsworth House. That would be the place to film it, and it would be rather wonderful returning to the stately home that I spent so much time in as a child, and exploring the gardens as I grew up, and have them filming a series there. I mean, that would be marvelous, let's face it. In terms of the casting, it's an interesting one. So I suppose one that springs to mind, I mean, is Joyce, because she's such a vibrant character. And part of me might initially say Joanna Lumley. She's got that kind of, partly because of what she did in Absolutely Fabulous.
Yeah.
And Joyce is not as drunk or drug-addled as Patsy, but she can pile the blonde hair up on her head, and is sort of convinced that she's younger really than she actually is. But then there's people like Leslie Manville, who is currently in, is it called The Moonshine Murders? It's an adaptation of Anthony Horowitz's series.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's brilliant, and I think she could definitely pull that off quite easily. So there'll be somebody like that. Sophie, I have to admit, I have a really hard time thinking about who would play her. There are people from TV who influence her.
Okay.
So, for example, Sandy Toksvig, who I'm a big fan of, who's a comedian and writer and political activist, and another comedian, Susan Coleman, who's a Scots comedian. They're both tiny people. They're about 5 foot thereabouts, and Sophie is very short. Similar kind of build. So neither of Sandy Toksvig's an actor, but she's too old, dare I say it, to play Sophie. So there isn't anybody that immediately springs to mind. And the actor playing Mark would have to be very tall, very skinny. And I might leave my readers to suggest who would do that. I'm not sure at the moment. Joyce is just at the forefront of my mind the whole time when I think of anything visual. But yeah, it would be great fun to kind of cast that. I think next time I have a glass of wine, I shall let my imagination run riot. But yeah, it would have to be Chatsworth. There's nowhere else that it could be, really. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you are working on the third Joyce and Ginger book. Is that the next book that you're going to have out?
Possibly.
Possibly.
Well, I am currently working on a couple of short stories. So each Christmas for the last couple of years, I have sent my newsletter subscribers a free Christmas short story as a gift. So I have a couple of those. I'm trying to get another one out for this Christmas that I can send people in the newsletter. So subscribers should look out for that. And it means that I will have a few short stories, and I'd need to get a novella done, and I would have another collection ready to go out. There's a story with regards to Sophie and a possible love interest, which I want to work on. So it's a question of whether or not that gets finished before the next Joyce and Ginger. So it's a toss-up. We'll see how it goes over December with Sophie's story and my short stories. But it will either be a novella and a collection of short stories for Charlton House, or it will be Joyce and Ginger, but we'll see. It'll be a bit of a surprise for the new year.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we leave, can you tell readers where they can find you? Are you on Facebook? Is the best place to find you Instagram or your website?
Well, my website, which is katepadams.com, has all the information about my books there and where you can get them. And then I'm on Instagram as Kate P. Adams. I am on Facebook, but I don't use it very much. But so Instagram is probably the best place. And yeah, and the website. And if anybody wants to drop me a line, you can contact me through the contact page on the website as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciated the chance to chat with you today. And I hope that everybody enjoys your book.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
All
Take
right,
care.
then. Bye, everyone.
Bye.